Hello Hambini fans and welcome to another episode of Hambini Reams. In today's episode, all the way from Tunisia, which everyone knows is just a suburb of Paris, we have this look at me 765 Gravel RS, the top of the range look gravel bike. I think it's only a year old and it has come in to here for a new bottom bracket. So thanks very much to the owner for sending this in so we can ream it. Now, a lot of people know that I am from the French city of Marseille and I bleed Gallic blood. But in order to prove it, I am showing you my new tattoos. Here is my I Heart Macron tattoo, and if you're in one of the countries of the world where that could get you into trouble, here's an addition which you can show to the guy at the border's wife, and that should get you in. So the 765 Gravel RS, top of the range. This is the lightweight model. Going from the front to the back, the chap has got SRAM AXS Dub E-tap levers, hydraulic front disc brake, hydraulic disc at the rear as well. Now the stem is a look proprietary design, so I will come to that in a minute, but you basically get that with the frame set. All of this lot is gravel specific, and one of the key things the guy did was he has got this, which is a Dub wide crankset, and it's a Quark power meter type, and it came with this bottom bracket, which I've already removed. It's not particularly great, but we'll come on to that in a bit. But one of the things you notice about this when you pick it up, and appreciate it's got all the bits attached to it, it's like 3.5 kilos without any of the other bits and pieces to go in. So there's no crankset, no seat post, none of that lot. It's quite heavy. This is the look handlebar. I think you get this with the bike. None of these bolts are tight, by the way. I just put them together for the video. See, it's quite a big flare on there. I think this is 7075 aluminium, not sure, but I suppose it doesn't really matter. This is the look proprietary stem. I don't know how many sizes that comes in, but obviously it's going to affect your position quite considerably, and the number of spacers that go underneath it, again, that will affect your position. So as far as customizability goes, this isn't too bad because you can still tilt that, and if you wanted, you could put a normal stem on there, but it just wouldn't look as good. The headset system is fairly run-of-the-mill, so you've got a compression top cap, albeit it's designed specifically for the look stem. You just undo that and the cap comes off. Obviously it's not round, most of them are round, but it's secured in with a, I think it's M6 screw, countersunk screw, and underneath that you've got the top cap, and you can also remove this. To get this part you can just lift that off. This is the reinforcing part here. I'm not going to take that out, but whoever's cut this fork, it's not particularly square. It's not the end of the world. These spacers underneath are look proprietary spacers. That gives access to the headset, and you can just remove this like that. So that is the base part that separates the head tube from the rotating element, which is the stem. So in here it's a tapered headset, so the top bearing, which I'm clicking at, is smaller than the bottom bearing. There is a split ring compression ring that goes around the top, and then you push down on that and that gives you the preload. So you just remove it like that, and then that is it. So it's got a chamfer on that side, chamfer on the inside, and the split ring is there. An interesting feature on this bike is this top headset. So the seat is actually extremely round, I've measured it, but the bearing when it goes in is slack, but that's in the radial sense. This is an axial bearing, so it's designed to take load predominantly in that direction, the up and down direction. So what they've done is they've machined the seat angle very accurately with the chamfer. So if you put it in the other way, just to show you, so that's against the chamfer, you can see there's quite a bit of play in there. So when you put it in the correct way and then you load it up, it's on the chamfers. There's no radial alignment in there, no radial engagement. The actual bearing seat is extremely round, so I think it's by design intent rather than anything else. So this is the lower headset bearing, and the design philosophy here is to almost make this the fixed component, because radially there's no real play in there, and the seat is extremely round. So I think this is the fixed one, and they've done the other side to allow for a bit of misalignment when they make the frame. Interesting feature on this bike, or particular setup of this bike, is because this is a bike in the UK, normally the left brake does the rear, but on this bike it does the front. There's nothing really to say about that other than the routing is not fully internal, so it exits from the handlebars and then comes down here. The chaps put some heli tape here, and then it comes through the fork and then goes down to the front caliper. The front of this bike is a mount for a cycle computer, Garmin or something like that. Not sure if this is part of the delivery of the bike or if it's an add-on. This is the drive side fork through axle mount, and you have to say, when you look at this, this is probably that extra level of detail that you get when you buy, or you should get when you buy a very expensive bike. It's very well compacted. The paint round there is a perfect circle, so whoever's done it has either faced it afterwards, which I suspect has happened, or they've been very, very careful when they've been painting it. This is the front brake caliper. I haven't undone these to check because I didn't want the chap to lose his alignment. Obviously you can see the bike is used. Beneath that is the threaded portion for the through axle. Again, I can't really comment much on there. This is the down tube, complete with all the bottle holder mounts if you want to go bike packing or something like that. The thing that really stands out is the quality of the fit and finish around these things. There's no scabby paint, nothing. It is just perfect. The front mech, it is a wireless mech, so there's no cable going to it. It's just on an integrated battery. Bottom bracket, I'll cover that in a minute. This section here has this dog leg, and I'll show you some of the stuff with that later on, but basically the carbon in this area is extremely thick, and it has to be because this is a stress razor by putting that bend in there. So the rear dropout, this is fully replaceable, so if you snap it you can take that out and then get a new one. And at the same time you've also got the one on the far side, which again is replaceable should you break it. Next to that is the brake caliper mount, which I obviously haven't checked because again I didn't want to lose the alignment. This is the seat post. I mean, the thing you notice about that is, but I haven't got the actual seat post, you didn't send me it, but the hole that goes through it and the fit and the finish, so certainly the finish round there is extremely clean. Where the paint stops and the carbon starts, there's immaculate. The bottom bracket on this bike is BB386, or it's technically BB386EVO, so the limit value is 45.95 to 46. If I just zoom in, this comes out at 45.96 to 97, so it is bang on. I've checked the other side as well, and again, that is bang on. This is the chap's crankset. It is a Quark SRAM rival. Quark is now owned by SRAM. It's got a dub axle on it, which is indicated by this, and it's dub wide. Dub is a bit of a weird standard, and I think it's designed to sort of obliterate other standards and also make life difficult. It's 29 millimeters on the axle diameter where the bearing landings are. A lot of them are 30, which is a standard bearing size, and at the other end you've got Campag and Shimano. Campag uses 25 millimeters, and Shimano and their sort of compatible ones are all 24 millimeters. One of the features of this is, I guess, the crank arm. So the crank arm through here is a C-section. In torsion, a C-section is not that good. You're better off having like a full complete box section because it resists that twisting. So if, for example, you were in there and then put your pedals on and then you had tried to sort of twist it that way, this shape is not really good at resisting that kind of load. But to kind of compensate for that, what you can do is you can reinforce it, and this is extremely thick. And when I pick this up, this is a power meter variant, it does feel quite heavy. So there's probably there's obviously the engineering in there to be able to sense the power, but also these arms are considerably thicker. I mean, a key thing that I haven't really talked about is if you buy a Shimano crank, especially the new ones, they are hollow and glued together. This doesn't appear to be, it appears to be one piece. So the chance of this failing like a Shimano is almost zero. This is the SRAM bottom bracket that I removed from the bike. It is a 3-piece design, so you've got that half or section, the centre tube, which is quite flexible, and the other section, which is basically the same as that. Now, one of the things that is quite apparent with this is this uses proprietary bearings. So these are, I don't know what size they are, but the internal diameter is 29, but compared to a standard size, which is this one, and I've got the NTN 6806 LLUs, they're considerably smaller. So the load that goes through here is comparatively much higher than it would be through here. The other thing is this is plastic on the outside, so it will deform to whatever shape or angle your bottom bracket is at. Going back to this, to get this apart, you take that cap off and then put in an 8mm Allen key. I've already undone this. It's not usually that easy. And then out it comes. This is a wide axle, so it comes with an additional spacer, which is that. I need to keep that for later. The preload system on here is this collar, which you can undo and tighten by undoing that Allen key there. One of the problems, or the major problem with this setup, is you've got a taper on there, the male taper, and then the female taper on the other end. Now, when you bolt this up, what can happen is this can effectively move. I've exaggerated the movement there on the axle, so you can end up with a different DBCA within a certain manufacturing tolerance. So that is something you have to contend with, and it's one of the reasons, I guess, why SRAM have quite a large travel on the preload, and also you can buy, and they actively sell it, spacers to shim that out. So what I have done is I've made effectively a dummy bottom bracket, this one, and I'm just going to dry fit this up together to see how it goes. Just put this in loose, and there's a bit of play in there, which is to be anticipated, because I haven't tightened this up all the way, so we'll tighten that up to the required torque. Tighten this up, and I've backed the preload collar away, so it's giving me more play. That's okay. So now if I bring this up so it's hard up against the chainring side, like that, we can apply some preload by undoing that collar. And it just goes stiff, and now we've got no play. Give it a spin. And that's okay. So we know this will work when it goes into the bike. For some reason that is slightly beyond me, SRAM use 30mm spacers on a 29mm axle. Not sure why that is. If someone knows, then do let me know. I've set this up with the press, the bottom bracket with the appropriate adapter on that side, and the receiver on the other side, and you just literally push. Now when we get to halfway, we just need to stop to check we're not going to go and crush the hydraulic line. There's plenty of space in there, so it's not really too much of an issue. Okay, so we've got to halfway, so we just need to check that the line is okay. I've checked the line is okay. I've sprayed this with primer already, and we're just going to add a little bit of retaining compound. To be honest, on this frame, it probably doesn't need it because the fit is bang on. I've spread all the retaining compound out all the way, checked for the line, everything's okay. We can just continue to tighten now. So when you get this close to the side, you have to start tightening on this side because otherwise it hits the front mech. And we're okay around there, there's no gap, so we can dismantle this. This bike is for gravel use, so it's got NTN 6806 LLU seal, so these are a heavy contact. So the spin test on these won't be anywhere near as good, but the seals on here are extremely good, so you should get very good life out of them. As this is run in, the seal will start to wear down, so it will get faster over time, but it's something you need to be aware of if you're going to fit these, because they do have a drag penalty. Next thing we need to do is put the caps in. Don't know if I can do this one-handed. Oh, we can. One on that side and one on the other. I can assemble the crank, so the crank comes in from the non-drive side. Need to put the spacer on. Can tighten this up. Preload, again, this is always a bit of a faff, but if you hear it, there's a small amount of play. So we just need to undo the preload collar and back it out to take up the play and then put it back together. If you are going to do this, the best way to do it is to push the crank all the way towards the non-drive side and undo the clasp and then turn it anti-clockwise. I only needed a small amount there, literally maybe about 1/8 of a turn, and then tighten it back up. And then that should take the play out. Indeed it has. Word of warning, if you undo this too much and then try and screw it in to take up the slack, you'll find that the SRAM pre-adjuster, the adjuster, skips the thread, so you won't actually take any of the preload out, so any of the play. These adjusters are crap. I think there'll be a big market for aftermarket ones. Absolute rubbish. Right, it is that time of the show again. It is time for PowerPoint. This bike is as hot as Macron's wife. We just do need to do that pen check. Pen 15 check. Works beautifully. Right, a bit of a shill now. By Hambini H5. Remember to check me out on Instacrap and on Hambini Eng on Facebook and also on Patreon. There's loads of stuff on Patreon. I like to keep it fresh on the channel, so I give you my new absolute crapometer. It's not quite completely finished yet, but I am on the way to doing it. I will draw your attention to a few key features. The first of all is this, the absolute crap logo, which I've used the basic fonts on PowerPoint and I couldn't find a R logo, you know, for the R for registered trademark. So I lifted the S-Bahn logo from German railway stations. And this is the scale. The only one that I've completely agreed on is 50, which is Portuguese University. If you know what should go under number 40, perhaps plasto ceramic bearings, or 30, which might be, you know, we make our own bearings, or, you know, something along those lines, or some other ridiculous claim, yeah, do fill me in. Right, the next bit I have entitled What the Usual Twats Say. First up, we've got Road CC, so Advertising Central. There are just adverts everywhere. What are the stupid things that they say? Well, as I mentioned earlier, look knows its onions, as this is one very comfortable, smooth and responsive frame, all the while maintaining stiffness. That is a contradictory statement, and soon I'll have a video to show you how and why. Next one we've got, ooh, what's this one? This is Cyclocross magazine, and they've got something down here which is just unbelievably ridiculous. Off-road, the bike tracks well, and the acceleration and climbing efficiency are amazing when powering over roots and small rocks. Ooh, what's Simon Smythe said to, I don't think he's actually ridden the bike. We'll let him off that one. This is the Look website. I mean, this is slick, to be honest. It's got everything on there that you probably need, geometry, all that. It's nothing out of the ordinary. I wouldn't even say it's that particularly expensive. So you get the whole bike for €6,000. I've seen the frame for like 2,500 to 3,000 quid. So it's not overly expensive. I mean, it's still not cheap, but you know, in the days of like $6,000–7,000 frames, this isn't there. These are some of the shots of the inside. I mean, the inside of this bike is basically immaculate. I mean, if this is the head tube, I think it's the head tube. Yeah, I mean, there's just nothing there. Something that you can really look at and notice is the quality of the riv nuts and the hole that they've used. So there's no fraying around the hole at all. Zilch. Very unusual. It's just very, very clean. I can't really say any more than that. This is the bottom bracket geometry. Now what I've done here is I've overlaid the Skylon and the Look Gravel 765. It is a BB386EVO bottom bracket. Most people just call that BB386. So it's 86.5mm wide, so from left to right, and 46mm the nominal diameter. The actual tolerance is 45.95 to 46, unless you're Gerard Vrooman and you just make the tolerances up as you go along. Now, if you look at this, you would accept it, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. The blue line is the Skylon, the grey line is the 765. Now, if I blow the scale up, now what you see is the difference between what is a very good frame, so the Look frame is perfectly acceptable, and the Skylon. The Skylon RTM, at the time manufacturing, is just a different league. It's almost like a machined hole. So they can obviously control the contraction and expansion from the curing process very, very well, and it shows. Yeah. One thing I would say is the 795 Blade RS. So I've got one sample here, which is a 765, and it's, I'm going to say, is perfect. Very, very good. 795 Blade RS. I've helped numerous people with this bike, and specifically the bottom bracket. A lot of them have very slack BB386 bottom brackets in there, so they're in excess of 46mm. And the sort of way to fix it, or the standard thing they were doing, was fitting these thread together bottom brackets. This is an inferior design. I'm not, knocking token for it at all. It's just you've got a clearance fit in there, and you want to avoid it because you lose stiffness, you'll lose power. Big issue with this bike was not so much the frame, it was the SRAM Dub and the distance between crank arms, and I'm just going to talk briefly about the practical problems associated with it. The DBCA is this distance here. I've sort of tried to show you schematically here. The arrows might not show up very well on YouTube, but it is basically the distance between where the bearings would sit, or your spacers would sit, in that gap. Yeah, so on this one on the top right, it's basically between this point here and this point here. So that's how much distance you got to work with. The problem is when you have this joint, you can actually move the whole of this crank arm. So that crank arm can move sort of, I'm making this up now, but let's say it's 90mm. Depending on how lucky or unlucky you are, the same crank, so if you bought 10 of them, one could be 90, one could be 91, one could be 92. Yeah, from a bottom bracket or even just building the bike up problem, you're going to have to shim it, or you rely on that preload collar to take it all out. It's not ideal. This is my website. If you're going on there, you will get a bit more on DBCA, how to measure it and all that kind of stuff. And the one I've used actually on there is a SRAM GXP axle, which is a very similar setup to Dub. So go on there and have a look. This is an excerpt from SRAM's manual. Now I appreciate this is a Quark crankset, but it's the same thing. It's the same thing that applies. And I've zoomed in on one particular statement they've put. So if there is any play in the crankset, remove the crank arms and apply additional grease to the spindle, turn the preloader and basically reassemble it. So their solution is to put grease on and then you tighten it up again and then try and get it to where it's supposed to be. In practice, you could end up with a ridiculous amount of torque, or it never gets there because each time you put it on and off, you're actually deforming the material ever so slightly. Overall, this frame is difficult to fault, and I think the benefit for Look is they are in charge to a large extent of their manufacturing. So I think this frame is made in Tunisia, it could be made in France, it could be made in the Far East, but whatever, they have historically made fairly good frames. I think the 795, some of those were a bit ropey, as I've mentioned earlier, but on the whole, they're pretty good. It is well made. You know, if someone gave you that frame, you would be hard pushed to find a fault with it, and compared to other frames, this is very, very good. The difficulty in this job was the SRAM Dub setup, which I've kind of talked about before. This 29mm axle, it's designed almost to give you market segregation. So changing a crank isn't really that difficult. It just requires a few Allen keys. Changing a bottom bracket is another step level of difficulty. A press fit one is considerably more difficult to change than a threaded one. If you've got the right tooling, the threaded one's dead easy to change. But by having that 29mm, the oddball axle, they've made it difficult, made you stick with SRAM. That's my opinion. They could have gone to 30, which is okay, but it limits them in a few areas, because then Rotor or somebody else could come along and then you can just rip it out and then put a new one in fairly easy. It's dead easy to change. So this 28.99 or the 90 is there. And I think they've basically been hamstrung by Shimano's patents, because ideally they would want to go to 24mm, then you drop in Hollowtech, SRAM, interchangeability. They did have that kind of with GXP, but they dropped it. I think that was mainly to do with their bearing setup, and certainly some of the bike teams that I supplied went and left it were there. And that brings us to the end of this video. If you did enjoy it, remember to smash that like button, and if you didn't, get a life. And as always, keep banging your hairdresser.